Well, it's no more nominee, but now Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. And to discuss the impact of this true historic moment, we have two Harvard Law graduates and a former classmate of Justice Brown Jackson here to discuss it on Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Claville. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. We want to thank you all for joining us once again here as we broadcast live on the campus of the Norfolk State University from WNSB. It's the new sound of Hot 91, the soul of VA from Hampton Roads, Virginia. Beautiful Hampton Roads, Virginia. I don't know about you, but we've got some phenomenal weather and spring is truly here. As always, we would not be what we are without you. We thank you for your support, for supporting Stay the Water and all that we do here at the university. And of course, a major shout out to the greatest alumni in the world, and that is the Norfolk State Spartan Nation. Listen, we also got our producer who's always here to help us keep us right and tight, Marvin Folks, also known as DJ Scandalous, which you can hear every Monday through Friday on WNSB, the new soul of VA, from 2 to 6 p.m. Well, listen, for those of you that have been joining us for an entire last month, you know that we've been talking about the historic nomination and process of, at the time, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. But no more is it the nominee, no more is it judge, but it is Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who was sworn in and celebrated on the grounds of the White House, of the U.S. of the White House being appointed, and also sworn into the U.S. Supreme Court. For the first time in the history of our nation, 230 years, we have an African-American black woman who sits on the bench. Again, this is a historic moment for our country, historic moment for women, historic moment for black Americans, black people all across the country and really the world. Because I talk about the United States being, the beacon of light for the world. And to kind of close the circle on this discussion, we've got two phenomenal legal scholars themselves and also a personal classmate and dorm mate of now Supreme Court Justice Jackson here to join us. So in the first half of the show, we have with us a former prosecutor, also law professor at South Texas College of Law at Houston, opinion columnist for U.S. Today, and a Spelman College and Harvard Law School college graduate we have with us here right now on air, Njeri Rutledge. Welcome to Stay the Water.
Thank you so much for having me.
Njeri, Professor, again, I talked about how this is not just a historic moment for the black people, for our country, but really the world. But, from you, and you're a classmate and a dorm mate of Justice Brown Jackson. Tell us what this moment means for you.
For me personally, it's a moment of great pride. I remember Justice Jackson very fondly as someone who was very kind and down to earth and had laser focus. She was very, very hardworking. As a mother to a little black girl, she's not so little, she's 12, but I'm so proud that it lets her know that she can do anything. I cannot wait to see some Justice Jackson dolls come out and other things to try and inspire our children. So it's a moment of great joy and pride. But also as an American who enjoys the rule of law, as a black woman in the legal field, we should all be celebrating this moment because I think of her as a true American hero. I mean, this is someone who worked hard always. When you go all the way back to high school, she was working hard and excelling. And like many people in the black community, she was discouraged from following her dreams. She was told not to, maybe you shouldn't aim so high. And now look at her. So this really is an inspirational moment for all of us.
Wow. There's so much to unpack in what you just said. And I want to take our time and just kind of peel back the layers, on this. We were talking before the show, and you said that you were actually in the room during the hearing. You were there day 1, day 2. I was there day 3, and we were talking about just how contentious it was with some of the people there. Tell our audience about what it felt like being in the room, hearing the questioning, and from your perspective, now Justice Brown Jackson's, her response, demeanor, disposition, and the like.
I was very, very proud of Justice Jackson, and I know she'll be soon to be justice, because actually she takes the official oath in June or July when Justice Breyer retires. But I'm going to, because I love calling her justice, I'm going to go ahead and use that name. Mix of emotions. On one hand, because I was there during day 1, I had the privilege of hearing another person I was in law school with, Professor Lisa Fairfax, introduce her. And I got to hear Judge Jackson herself. And it was at that moment that was the first time I actually cried, because the reality and how enormous it was just hit me. And I was so touched and just feeling so filled with emotion. One of the reporters in front of me just kind of touched my hand like it's going to be okay, but just so excited. I was also disgusted by the disrespect that she faced. The first person I heard in person was Senator Blackburn, who had the audacity to ask her about her hidden agenda and the negative tone. I was disgusted the second day to hear my own Texas senator, who I don't really want to claim, Ted Cruz, and Senator John Cornyn, but especially Ted Cruz, and the ridiculous, irrelevant questions about critical race theory and the hostility and always cutting her off. But I must say, I'm not surprised at how she handles herself. What you saw, that quiet grace, is who she is. It's who she has always been. So I knew that she would be able to sail through and handle anything that was attacked or any attack that came her way. I'm very proud of her, but I'm very sad for the country. I'm very sad for the Republican Party, that the party who said that they were not going to mistreat or disrespect Justice Jackson did exactly that in the most nasty, irrelevant, dog whistle, racist way they possibly could.
You mentioned your senator, right?
No, please don't call him that.
Well, he is a U.S. senator. We got to give that respect to the office. But there are different sides. You either love him or like him, like a lot of our elected officials. But you guys were all classmates at Harvard.
I don't try to claim Senator Cruz as my classmate. We were there around the same time. I think he was a year ahead of us, technically.
Okay.
But, yes, there were interactions, and they knew each other from the law review, which made it particularly felt personal when he would constantly cut her off mid-sentence and wouldn't even give her the courtesy. It's one thing to have a different ideological viewpoint. It's another thing to be just disrespectful.
Wow. You mentioned the critical race theory piece, and we see where a lot of this is brewing up out of misinformation. Now, as a law professor, and I'm pretty sure you encounter a lot of this type of discussion, and we see it in the political fray. Why do you believe that critical race theory is becoming that hot button issue, and especially why it was utilized against Ketanji Brown Jackson?
I think it's become a hot button issue because the Republican Party is masterful at spinning things. Critical race theory has nothing to do with elementary school education or even college education. It is a legal theory used in law school, developed by law professors, that is part of, critical theory, whether it's critical race theory or critical homosexual theory or critical Latino theory. I mean, they're all different branches of it. And so they have instead tried to use this theory as something scary. And I think when you don't understand something, you get afraid. Mm-hmm. And so we have all of these grassroots people acting in ignorance as if we're trying to make their children feel bad and we're trying to indoctrinate their children. And nothing could be further from the truth. History, including history that involves African Americans is important, but it's so much more clever to label something as scary as critical race theory as if it's a doctrine that's going to take over the entire country, not just the schools, but now they're saying it's going to take over the courts. The truth is, when critical race theory, was at its peak, Justice Jackson and I were in law school, we didn't study it. So when she says she didn't study it, that's a truthful statement. We didn't study critical race theory. It was something that we saw Derek Bell and other Delgado and other wonderful, brilliant people talking about, but we were trying to just get through law school.
Right.
And we already knew what it was like to be black in America. So it wasn't something we really felt the need to study at the time. Of course, we've both educated ourselves about it, but it certainly does not dictate how a judge acts. And as a former judge myself, she's already said repeatedly, I look at the facts and I look at the law as objectively as possible. And that's what every American should want out of a judge. But for some reason, that wasn't good enough for Republicans.
This is Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. You're joining us here as we broadcast live from the campus of the Norfolk State University from WNSB, Hot 91, the soul of VA. For those of you that have been joining us all last month, you know that we've been talking about the historic nomination and the hearing and the process for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Well, the vote is in, and she now will be the new Supreme Court justice that will replace retiring Justice Breyer on the U.S. Supreme Court. With us to discuss the impact of this moment is one of the former classmates of now Supreme Court Justice, soon to be, Ketanji Brown Jackson, Njeri Rutledge, law professor out of South Texas College of Law in Houston. Professor, a lot was talked about the public service of Justice Brown Jackson. And you also have, let's just say, you've also been involved in public service as a judge. You're a professor now. How important do you think is that perspective on the court? Because in past shows, we talked about how, you have these 9 individuals from 9 different parts of the country, 9 different experiences, 9 different educational settings, family settings, and the like. But they come together and they have these conversations behind closed doors where the law clerks aren't there, nobody's there, but it's just them. And they're speaking on these very important issues that are going to dictate our lives for the next 20, 40, 50, sometimes 100 years. How important do you believe her perspective is when it comes to sitting down and having that conversation?
Her perspective is vital. It's so important that we finally have a black woman in the room with all of her lived experience, not just as a black woman, but also as a working mother, as someone who has relatives who are in law enforcement, as someone who has a relative who is incarcerated, as someone who's been a public defender. So that perspective is going to be really valuable because she is known as a consensus builder. She has a lovely personality. Even the most hate-filled, at least in their actions towards her, acted very disrespectfully. Even people who questioned her during the hearings had to admit and acknowledge that you're a lovely person.
Right.
It really was a bit surreal. But putting that aside, when we think about some of the most important things that are going to impact the American people, whether it's reproductive rights, whether it's no-knock warrants and criminal procedure, whether it's affirmative action, those 9 people are going to have a tremendous impact on those things that impact our lives. And we need diverse perspectives in the room. We have had law professors in the room. Mm-hmm. We've had people who have worked for large law firms in the room. That's very different from someone who has done public service, because if you've done public service, you are more in tune with the people.
Right.
You're more in tune with different diverse ideas and the struggles that they go through. And that's something that even Justice Breyer commented about Justice Jackson, because he said, had a way of knowing how to walk in the other person's shoes and seeing things from their point of view. Right. And that is so valuable. The thought of having this court in existence for so long and never having a federal public defender is mind-boggling. Now, I was a prosecutor. I love being a prosecutor, but we need to have both perspectives in the room. Otherwise, you're always going to kind of see things through the lens of the government.
Right.
And we need people to see things through all sides.
Absolutely. You know, another aspect that you mentioned was individuals having to admit, you know, you come from a great family, great foundation, you know, and like a lot of African-American families, I mean, her family was like a lot of ours. You know, mother and father worked, they were blue collar, and then when opportunities opened up to do better, they did better. You know, and she followed in the footsteps of her father and also the like. And she had been before them several times for appointments, not just for the Federal Sentencing Commission, but also to judgeships. What do you believe was in the mindset of the Republicans that voted against her? Because three voted for her, but the other 47 voted against her. What do you think was in their mind?
I think the midterm elections was in their mind. I think the narrative that they planned to spin about Democrats are soft on crime was in their mind. I think for Lindsey Graham, Senator Graham, who had some very just embarrassing, grandstanding statements about, well, how do you think Justice Kavanaugh felt? And, you know, well, would you agree that this is outrageous? And it was almost like he was trying to settle a score.
Wow.
And he's also seemed to be in his feelings that the brilliant Judge Childs didn't get the nomination. So instead of being fair-minded, he really seemed like he already had his mind made up, which is very sad because she is one of the most qualified people we have put on the court in a long time.
Absolutely.
So we saw a lot. Yeah, we saw a lot of political theater, for lack of a better word. I think they were saying those buzzwords like critical race theory, and the stressful one was the thing about soft on pornographers.
Yeah.
I think that was a coded message to some of those violent fringe groups, and it's very troubling because the stakes really weren't that high for the Republican Party, right? They have a supermajority, conservative majority in the court, and Judge Jackson, soon to be Justice Jackson, is not going to change that balance. So why not take the high road? But instead, they got as low as they could with some of the statements that were patently false. All kinds of independent journalists, Washington Post, New York Times said, even conservative media said, she is a mainstream, fair judge. She is not soft on crime. She is not soft or in favor of child pornographers. But the negative narrative still continued.
Absolutely. You know, I want to touch on the balance of the court in just a moment, but I want to go back to these issues that are coming before the court. You know, I try to press to our audience the impact of these decisions. Like thousands of cases come before the U.S. Supreme Court, and less than 10% are heard. It's actually in the single digits, right?
Yeah.
So really, your case lives and dies at the lower appellate or the intermediate appellate level. And a lot of times it dies at the trial level, at the district court. And these decisions, again, they're going to dictate what we do. I mean, case in point, let's just look at Plessy versus Ferguson. Separate but equal. It dictated our lives in this country for 100 years until it was actually overruled by, of course, Brown versus Board of Education, and then, of course, a few other cases which actually impacted our everyday lives outside of education, like housing and things of that nature. But right now, she was asked, would you recuse yourself from the Harvard affirmative action case? How impactful is that decision to say, I will recuse myself from that particular case, and then other cases that may be coming up where it may be a perceived conflict of interest?
That's a very interesting issue because the Harvard case, one of the reasons she stated that she was recusing herself is because she's actually part of the Board of Fellows that's being named in the lawsuit, right? Also keep in mind that Harvard affirmative action case has a companion case. So nothing is prohibiting her from speaking on, writing about, and weighing in on the companion case for the affirmative action case. Mm-hmm. There are many people on the Supreme Court currently with entanglements to Harvard. We have a former dean of Harvard. We have many people who graduated from Harvard. Mm-hmm. Her connection was a little bit more detailed because she is part of that Board of Fellows.
Yes.
In terms of other recusals, I think right now all eyes on Clarence Thomas when it comes to recusals. There is no, although most courts in the country have this different code of ethics and, we want to avoid the appearance of impropriety. Mm-hmm. We've got some appearance of impropriety here that still has not been addressed. So that probably is going to set the tone in terms of when judges should or should not recuse themselves. I don't see several more recusals in her future. Mm-hmm. I think this was a special case, and I think, just like as we're going to see with the abortion rights case, some decisions are already made, and she's going to be in the position of writing dissenting opinions.
Mm-hmm. You know what? Let's kind of pivot very quickly to the Clarence Thomas piece, the Justice Thomas piece, because that's a very interesting. I mean, that issue has so many legs, and we're going to dive into it on this show later on. But talk to our audience a little bit about what's going on there, and from your perspective, should he recuse himself, or should there be some other issues that are raised as far as the canon and ethics and the like?
From my perspective, he should recuse himself. The fact that he actually weighed in on one of the decisions regarding the January 6th insurrection or failed insurrection attempt, he already crossed the line, right? He should not have weighed in on that based on what we know of his spouse. I mean, who should be closer to you in your life than your spouse? And these text messages that have surfaced shows that she had a very strong viewpoint favoring one side, and we believe that that's probably has impacted him. But even if it hasn't, the job of the judge is to try to avoid the very appearance of impropriety. Yeah. And the fact that this is making people question that should be very concerning for all Americans, because we talk about we want to maintain the legitimacy of the court. You can't maintain the legitimacy of the court if you keep politicizing it. You can't maintain the legitimacy of the court if a spouse of one of the justices is knee-deep in trying to overthrow the government. Mm-hmm. And so that's a problem that they really do need to address.
And what we're speaking of is that, Clarence Thomas, Justice Thomas's wife, text messages were found in this J6 investigation, basically trying to create an opportunity to overthrow the government or stop the election and change the election in favor of former President Donald Trump. So, like I said, this, we got the vote over with. Now, Capitol Hill is about to dive into J6. So that's going to be very interesting. Matter of fact, we may bring you back for that discussion to help us break that down. But I want to pivot now back to the court itself. You mentioned earlier that, her confirmation was not going to change the balance of the court. Right now, the conservatives have a solid 6-3 block on the court. There are only 3 justices that are now considered to be liberal justices. And right now, I'm thinking after Justice Breyer retires, the 3 liberal justices will be all women.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I'm just thinking about that. It'll be all women. There'll be no men, black men, white men, Hispanic, whatever, Asian American, that it will be liberal justices. And then the 6 conservative justices will be all men. Mm. As a matter of fact.
Well, no, Amy Coney Barrett.
That's right. Amy Coney Barrett. Absolutely. So, but that's the majority will be all men. So That's an interesting dynamic within itself, because now we have some social dynamics in play as well. There's a huge discussion out there of should we add more justices to the court? And of course, we know those discussions first start in the legal academy. So Professor, I want to get your take on it. What's your take on the 6-3 balance? And moving forward, should we add more justice to the court while there is a Democratic president?
That is such a tough issue. I see both sides of it, so I am actually on the fence. In one sense, the politicization of the court is very troubling, mm-hmm. and certainly it would be nice to kind of balance it, because some of the ways that the Republican Party handled the Supreme Court was a bit unseemly, starting with Barack Obama trying to nominate Merrick Garland. And the fact that they wouldn't even...
Didn't give him a hearing. Even a
wouldn't
meeting.
give them a hearing, wouldn't do any of that. And then the way that Justice Barrett was kind of shoved through right after Justice Ginsburg, people had already started early voting the election. And so that part is troubling. However, even though there's no law prohibiting us increasing the number of justices, the way the pendulum swings back and forth in this country from left to right, I fear what would happen if we did that, meaning the Democratic Party, what the Republicans would do next time they're in power. Lindsey Graham already made a promise that if the Republicans were in control of the Senate, Judge Jackson, who is now Justice Jackson, never would have had a hearing. We need to take that kind of threat very seriously. And I think more importantly than trying to pack the court or to increase the numbers of the court is to get out and vote and try to make sure that we hold Congress.
Absolutely. Well, we're in our closing moments of this interview, and Professor, we've enjoyed hearing your perspective from not just from an African-American woman viewing these hearings, but as a personal friend, a classmate of now soon-to-be Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. But I want to get your closing thoughts, but I want our audience to know that you are an HBCU graduate as well, Spelman College, and also a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And I want you to talk to us about the impact of the HBCU on your career, your life, being a Spelman woman, and because we know that's a different designation than all the HBCUs. And just, again, where do we go from here after seeing what we saw and experiencing what we experienced with this historic nomination and vote?
Well, I am a proud graduate of Spelman College. We're about to celebrate our Founders Day tomorrow. And I am a proud member of my sorority. I must say Judge Jackson is unaffiliated with any D9 sorority. I know there's a lot of, rumor like, is she this, is she that? She's not affiliated. Judge Jackson studied, as she should, and she focused on her family and her grades while I was pledging. I think that Spelman really shaped who I was, and it helped nurture my dreams. I tell people that Harvard Law School was the frosting. Spelman baked the cake. I love HBCUs. I love Spelman College. It made me who I am today, and I just couldn't be happier to be a graduate from Spelman. Judge Jackson's parents went to Tuskegee and North Carolina A&T, and she's got, I forgot where her brother went to school, but he also went to a HBCU. Judge Jackson got fixated on Harvard from debate, and it's done her very well. One thing that I try to tell people in the black community about how wonderful she is and her character is that sometimes, if people are familiar with the TV show A Different World,
absolutely,
there have been people who have tried to compare me to Whitley. I would compare her to Kimberly Reese.
Okay.
She knows who she is as a black woman. She was hardworking, brilliant, loyal, just that good friend that you would want in your corner. Absolutely. So in Southern terms, she is truly good people, and she is someone that we should really be celebrating and rallying behind. In terms of where do we go from here onward, we need to celebrate, but we need to get organized. This wonderful moment happened because President Joe Biden kept his promise that he was going to put a black woman on the Supreme Court. He did it, and now we need to show up in the midterms for him. Because when Lindsey Graham said this would have never happened, take him at his word and make him eat him.
Absolutely. With us, thank you so much, Professor Njeri Rutledge, law professor at South Texas College of Law in Houston, former classmate and dorm mate of now Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Listen, thank you so much, and we look forward to having you back here on State of Order.
Thank you for having me.
God bless. Well, again, there are so many different perspectives, and we're so glad to have that perspective of Professor Rutledge. You can learn more about what she's doing and where she's at www.njerirutledge.com. That's www.njerirutledge.com. Again, we mentioned it's a historic moment, but now it is history in the making, and we have it here. But we'll be right back on Stay the Water as we bring back to our show Vivian Hamilton, Professor of Law at William & Mary. We'll be back in just a moment.
I'm Dr. Felicia Mebane, Executive Director of the Center for Public Health Initiatives at Norfolk State University. April is Minority Health Month, and we want you to focus on your health.
Taking care of your mental health is just as important as taking care of your physical health. Create a healthy routine that is right for you, including eating a healthy, nutrition-rich diet, exercising, and getting plenty of sleep. Each week, focus on reducing stress by adding a new healthy habit, like 1 minute of meditation during stressful periods of the day. Enjoy healthy habits like listening to relaxing music on the way home.
This focus on your health was provided by the Center for Public Health Initiatives at Norfolk State University. For more information, go to www.nsu.edu/public health.
Welcome back at Say the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. Once again, I want to thank all of you for joining us here as we broadcast live from the campus of the Norfolk State University here in the great city of Norfolk on WNSB, the new sound of Hot 91, the soul of VA. We're here in Hampton Roads as we broadcast live in this beautiful area. We've got phenomenal weather. Spring is here. It's in the air. Pollen is also here. So make sure you get your allergy medication and make sure that you keep yourself safe. And we understand things are open up, but we want to make sure everyone remains vigilant, remains safe. If you're not vaccinated, consider getting vaccinated so that we can help everybody around us, including yourself. Always with us, we have our producer of the show that keeps us going here, Marvin Folks, who is also a PhD student now at ODU for computer science. So proud of him. And he's here with us every Sunday as we are. You can hear him every day, Monday through Friday from 2 to 6 p.m. here on the Soul of VA. Well, listen, for those of you that have been joining us for the last month, we've been talking about and discussing from the different perspectives, the historic nomination, the process of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Well, last week, the vote was in, and 53 to 47, she will be the new U.S. Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, taking over for retiring Justice Breyer, who she clerked for. And to talk about this historic vote and what is to come next, because we're looking at the court itself and the decisions that are going to be made, we have two phenomenal legal scholars with us, two Harvard law graduates. In the first half of the show, we had Njeri Rutledge, Professor Rutledge, who was actually a classmate and dorm mate of now Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. And now with us, we have Vivian Hamilton, who is the founding director of the William & Mary Center for Racial and Social Justice, joining us, and Professor of Law at William & Mary School of Law. Professor Hamilton, welcome to Stay the Water. So glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I love your show, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, listen, thank you so much for your support. You know, we do our very best to really get the message out and discuss issues that are important to the community, not just from a local standpoint, but from a national and really international standpoint. And we think this moment is not just a moment for that particular family, which is a great moment, but really a great moment for our country, for African Americans, for women, and really for the world. Professor Hamilton, as a black woman and law professor, Ivy League graduate, Yale undergrad, Harvard Law School, what is this moment? But before we dive into the issues of cases that are going to come up, what does this moment mean for you?
It is like Professor Rutledge said in the first half hour. This is a huge milestone. It's a huge milestone for Black people in the U.S., but I also think that that it's a milestone for all people in the U.S. It's important for Black people, for young Black people, to see themselves represented in the highest levels of government, holding highest public offices. But I think it'll also communicate to all Americans who might currently have some skepticism about the level of competence that a Black woman jurist would bring to the Supreme Court, that indeed Black people can be and indeed are as competent as anyone else to hold these incredibly significant positions.
That's one aspect that we haven't really talked about, but image, right? Image and being competent. And, I'm really big on African Americans being portrayed in popular culture, television, advertising, and the like. We have two black sons, right? And, I'm always looking for, where's the black male? What role is the black male playing? Is he playing the lead role? Is he playing the sidekick? Is he playing, a role that is negative and so forth? And the view of a black woman that comes from a black family, raised in the South, that rises to the level that she hit. I mean,
and who does not conform in any way to some of the sort of the most pernicious and sticky stereotypes that so many Americans hold of black women. I think that I do think that is important, and I know that we've been talking about the importance of for those of us who are people of color to see for ourselves and the pride that we feel in seeing the first black woman confirmed to the Supreme Court. But I think that there will be sort of broader implications, and that there will be a broader ripple effect as she spends the next several decades issuing decisions, being viewed as sort of one of this it remains a highly esteemed body and part of our government, even though it may have been it may have been tarnished a little bit in recent years.
Right.
The Supreme Court still it still holds a special place in our public consciousness.
Absolutely. I've always viewed the Supreme Court as the all wise one that sits between the two branches of government, and hold on a second, let's go ahead and settle this the right way. Let's look at the law. Let's look at the policy. Let's go through an analysis and come to a reasonable decision under the law that's best for our country moving forward. And I think a lot of people still view it that way, even though, I go back to, the nomination of Bork, former Judge Bork. I go to the nomination hearing of now Justice Clarence Thomas, and of course, the last several with Gorsuch, also with Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, and now, do you believe the court has been politicized? And if it has, what's the impact of that?
It has been politicized, both the nominations process, as well as too many of the decisions coming out of the court itself. And like I said, I think that there has been some chipping away as a result of the esteem in which we hold the court and trust it as making objective, not politically motivated decisions. And so beginning with Mitch McConnell's refusal to hold hearings on the nomination of Merrick Garland, in addition to what appears to be I think Professor Rutledge mentioned this, the disheartening possibility that if there is an opposition party Senate, that no nominee would get a hearing. That's a true erosion of what has been consistently throughout our history, a democratic norm, and and efforts on the part of the political bodies, on the part of the Senate, to ensure that the Supreme Court process and the Supreme Court itself is viewed as being above politics. And Judge Jackson, despite her credentials, despite having more years on the bench than any other sitting justice did at the time of their confirmation hearings, got, I think you mentioned earlier, she got 3 Republican votes. Justice Roberts got 22 opposition votes.
That he did. Absolutely.
And so we see just over the course of just several years how the politicization has gotten just accelerated.
Wow. You mentioned Merrick Garland, but I want people to understand it's not just that they didn't hold a hearing, but they didn't even hold a courtesy meeting. Because again, it's not in the rules of the process, but it's become part of the practice where nominees go office to office, meeting with the members of the Judiciary Committee and the like, and they wouldn't even do that, right? So
exactly.
So that shows. And
he claimed it was because it was an election year,
right?
And it was 11 months. It was 11 months before the election, and so it was a brazen political move, and just and shameless, but unfortunately it was effective, and
Absolutely.
I think that is what is most important to some politicians.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think Justice Amy Coney Barrett was in the election year. I think that was 2020, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly.
So, again, in politics, we have very short memories, right?
Exactly.
Whatever works for the moment. As a matter of fact, just if I could, just a moment, I remember for 8 years, the Republicans saying we're going to repeal and replace, Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act. And I remember after President Trump won election, they pressed them. They said, "What are you going to do about the Affordable Care Act?" They said, "Oh, we're not interested in that anymore."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying to myself, and the people were like, "Oh, okay, that's all right." So again, is the political memory, but I digress.
No.
Professor Hamilton,
you're absolutely right.
I want to talk about the impact of various cases that are coming up in the perspective of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. You are the founding director for the Center for Racial and Social Justice at the William & Mary School of Law. What are some of the issues that you foresee that are coming into the pipeline, that are there now, and some that are coming into the pipeline that you may see Justice Brown's imprint or impact on those issues?
Well, maybe the first case I'll mention is one where she will not be participating, just so that folks are clear on that. And that is Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, which is the suit challenging, it's asking whether all pre-viability prohibitions on elective abortions are unconstitutional. That decision is going to come out this summer, and so in all likelihood, before she has even ascended to the court. Let's see, there are a number of cases where the court has granted cert for the upcoming October term, and one is challenging the constitutionality of the Indian Child Welfare Act. And so I don't know if folks are familiar with it.
No. Go ahead and break it down for us.
Okay, so the Indian Child Welfare Act, referred to as ICWA, was enacted to protect indigenous children from being removed from their homes, from their communities, and adopted by non-Indians. And so people might have heard of the Indian schools where, Indian children were removed from their homes and placed in these boarding schools in an effort to, quote, to civilize them, to assimilate them into majority white culture. Wow. And the result was devastating for indigenous communities. So ICWA requires states to first try to place indigenous children with extended family within their communities or with other indigenous families. So this suit that was brought, it was brought by a white couple who sought to adopt an indigenous child over the objection of the members of the tribal nation. The trial judge held ICWA was unconstitutional and violated the Equal Protection Clause. Then the appeals court overturned that decision, but the Supreme Court has now agreed to hear the challenge. And so, as you might imagine, if ICWA is invalidated, then that further erodes some of the protections that the federal government has put in place to try to redress some of the wrongs that the nation has committed against indigenous communities. And so that promises to be a significant case. Can we talk about a couple of the others?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think that Professor Rutledge, and you talked a little bit about Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard.
Right.
That
which she says she will recuse herself from.
Right. And so I'm not clear if that means that she's recused from all aspects of that case, or like Professor Rutledge mentioned, whether they're some aspects of the case involving the University of North Carolina, she might continue to be involved in. But again, that is a significant case, and it asks whether the Supreme Court should overrule its precedent and hold that institutions of higher education cannot use race at all as a factor in admissions. And one thing, just to be clear, if you hear in the media and other folks talking about race-based admissions, no university uses race-based admissions. And most follow in some form, Harvard's method, which first, considers, of course, the grades and test scores, extracurricular activities, right? So all of these other factors, and then there's kind of this personal factor,
right.
And race is just one aspect of the personal factor, and so in reality, race ends up playing a very small part in the admissions decisions, as opposed to playing a really determinative front and center part. And so we can talk. I know I don't want to go off on affirmative action, but I do think that there's just a lot of misinformation out there on how these admissions decisions are made, and the factors that actually do tend to lead to Asian American students being relatively underrepresented, because it really isn't sort of what folks pretend it to be.
As we talk about affirmative action, actually, I think is for me, and I've always been a proponent of this. I think it was actually given the wrong designation. It should have been given a designation years ago as corrective action.
Yeah.
Because what it does, it corrects the wrongs of the past. It creates a system and a process to do that. And I think what a lot of people have the misconception that race and gender has always been a part of admissions in college. Remember, no blacks allowed, no women allowed. We had women had to go to finishing schools or universities that were only for women. And then if they were admitted, it was only one. And there's also the issue of medical school admissions, where only a certain amount of black students are admitted every year. I mean, that doesn't happen by happenstance. There's a process that's in place that keeps that number low that we saw during the pandemic that really impacted how, we weren't prepared by educating more black doctors to go back into African-American and black communities to communicate and provide services during the pandemic. So,
I think that's such an important point, and you're absolutely right. Right, terminology matters, and right, affirmative action. The term affirmative action does suggest some unearned, undeserved benefit, some bonus. Whereas in reality, right, until very recent decades, there was affirmative action in admissions for white men. And that's why universities were populated by white men. And even today, right, there are benefits, right? The children of university students, right? The legacy admits, those are the ones, right? They get preferential consideration in admissions. Athletes get preferential consideration in admissions, and some of those preferences also work to skew or to shape the composition of university classes. Right, most legacy admits are not Asian or Asian American. Right, most of them are not Black. The overwhelming majority of them are white.
About 90,
but we don't talk about affirmative action for legacy admits.
Really, about 99% are none are only white Americans. But again, that's part of the history. And we talked about in the earlier part of the show with Professor Rutledge, the misconception of critical race theory. And as a law professor yourself, and as the founding director for the Center for Racial and Social Justice, that's a very key part of understanding how race impacted our society as a whole. As a director and a law professor, what do you think we can do or you can do as in the academy of kind of redirecting the misinformation about critical race theory?
Well, I wrote an article about this. So hopefully, clarifying misperceptions through research and publishing and trying to disseminate our research, hopefully helps. But the truth is, right, so how many people with 9-to-5 jobs are reading law review articles? And so I think that what that means is that those of us who are educators have to, and I think a lot of educators have been really good about this, and we're beginning to do this more. I think we have to make our research more approachable. We need to, to pen op-eds in newspapers, talk to people in our community whenever we get the opportunity to. Your show, I think, is an amazing example of this exact thing, and do more community outreach, more events that where we try to speak to not just those who are who are already in in total agreement with us, but those who may not agree. And so I was recently on a local television show, and the whole conversation was about this question exactly: what is critical race theory? And when we talk about white privilege, what do we talk about? Because a lot of people resent being called privileged. Well, a lot of white people resent being called privileged because they don't feel privileged. They struggle. They've worked for for opportunities that they've gotten. They're not wealthy. Like all the things. So you're talking about terminology. All the things that privilege can connote. But what they and maybe a better term could have been. We could have come up with a better term. But what they don't understand is that, yes, they have worked for what they have achieved, but there were many obstacles that they did not have to face, that they did not have to overcome in order to attain those achievements. And so I think that, just talking through all of these issues where we just sort of have lapsed into this sort of soundbite and misapprehension and misunderstanding each other. Just like the idea that we've got to stop teaching critical race theory in schools. Like you and Professor Rutledge were saying, our schools don't currently teach critical race theory.
It's not in the curriculum at all.
No, it's not.
And audience, the show that Professor Hamilton is referring to, she was a part of the Explainer 10 on Your Side State of Education series, where she sat down and talked about this particular issue and kind of unfolding what is, of course, now the buzzword phrase CRT. So you can go to wavy.com and you can find that series and hear more about it. Professor Hamilton.
Thank you for that little shout out.
No problem. Listen, Wavy is a great partner with us here in Norfolk State in the Center for African American Public Policy. They actually broadcasted our U.S. Senate debate, and also when the university we partner to host the only gubernatorial roundtable as well. So, they're great partners. So shout out to Carol Ward over there at wavy.com and everyone who's involved in working with this. So absolutely phenomenal. But nice. Professor Hamilton, we're in the final minutes, but I want to get your perspective on one more issue and give you a minute to have closing remarks about this. But this is the first Supreme Court justice that will have experience working as really for the public defender. You yourself also work for DC Legal Aid Society after a clerkship with a federal judge as well in DC and a litigator at a major office at Steptoe and Johnson. From your perspective, what is the impact of serving the public from that perspective will have in that closed room? Because I talk about that closed room where the judges and justices sit, where the law clerks aren't there. We're not there. We've given our research. We helped to co-write that opinion, but we're not in that room. Mm-hmm. What do you think? How is that impact and what's going on in there?
I think that it is. It's critical. As you all noted, right, the Supreme Court has never had a justice with experience as a public defender, but every year the court considers thousands of petitions in criminal cases. We've got prosecutors well represented on the court, so Justices Alito, Sotomayor, and Thomas all served as prosecutors, but research suggests that judges with criminal defense experience do often approach criminal cases differently, right? And these are the cases that play a major role in defining the constitutional rights of defendants, the rights people have when they're interacting with the police, the rights that they have during trial, permissible scope of punishment, all of that. Last year, after 8 years as a federal trial court judge, during her confirmation hearing to be confirmed to the D.C. Court of Appeals, Judge, soon-to-be Justice Jackson, noted the direct line between her public defender experience and her approach as a judge. And what she talked about was how she took extra care to make sure that the defendants appearing before her understood what was happening, because in her work as a public defender, she's seen firsthand how little her clients understood the legal system and how that misunderstanding, how that lack of understanding affected their ability to exercise their constitutionally guaranteed
Absolutely.
Rights.
That perspective is so important, and we don't have it a lot, but we're so thankful to have her, and we're also thankful to have you at William & Mary School of Law. We have thank you, Professor Vivian Hamilton, who is the director of the Center for Race and Social Justice. Go to the website and learn more about what she's doing and the articles that she's written, the true impact in this area and across the legal academy. Professor Hamilton, I want to thank you again for sharing your perspective as we discuss not just this historic moment, but the future of the impact of soon-to-be now Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. We're looking to have you back here on State of Water.
I hope so. The pleasure was mine. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We'll talk later. God bless. Well, that's it for us. You hear the music. Once again, State of Water, where we bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues that are important to the community. Enjoy this week. Remember to put God first and do everything you can to make your day and your area a brighter day. Until next Sunday, God bless.